Hello everybody and welcome to Catalogue Week. My name is Philippa Hellawell and I started as the 18th century record specialist earlier this year. One of the key focuses of my role is the records we have on the transatlantic slave trade. These can be found across our collection, from the Treasury and Colonial Office to the Customs Office and the High Court of Admiralty. My initial area of focus will be the records of the Royal African Company, which are collected in the series T70. This short talk will guide you through these records and set out some of my initial plans for cataloguing parts of the series. As with other areas of T&A's collection, T70 contains ideas and language that reflect historical viewpoints and attitudes and that are considered offensive today. This presentation will directly quote from these records. At the National Archives, we think it is important to show accurate representations of the record to help us understand the past. First of all, I want to begin with a short history of the Royal African Company. The Company of Royal Adventurers of England trading with Africa was incorporated by Royal Charter on 10th of January 1663. It was reconstituted by a new charter on 27th of September 1672 as the Royal African Company of England and had a monopoly of trade to Africa. The company's headquarters in Africa were at Cape Coast Castle on the Gold Coast, modern Ghana, and other forts were sited at the River Gambia, in Sierra Leone, and what was termed the Slave Coast, the modern Republic of Benin. The company traded in a variety of goods, but it was predominantly concerned with trading gold, ivory and slaves. These were bought with manufactured goods from Britain and Europe, and the slaves were then sold to plantation owners in the American colonies and West Indies in return for commodities such as sugar and tobacco. This is what is well known as the triangular trade. The company lost its monopoly in 1698, and individual traders were permitted to operate alongside them, but they were required to pay a set of charges to the company to contribute to the maintenance of the forts on the West African coast. The 1720s saw the decline of the company, and their number of transatlantic voyages dramatically reduced, though the company still continued to trade in slaves, gold, ivory and other goods. In 1750, the company's ports, settlements and factories in Africa were vested in the Company of Merchants Trading to Africa, incorporated by Act of Parliament. It was eventually abolished in 1821 and its property vested in the Crown. Despite this story of rise and decline, it is still reported to have transported more enslaved African men, women and children to the Americas than any other single institution in the history of the transatlantic slave trade. T70 contains the records of the Royal African Company, and these are divided into 44 subseries, which include letterbooks, minute books, petitions, accounts, ledgers, journals, reports and ship's books. In total, T70 has 1,696 volumes. Arguably most of T70 would benefit from enhanced catalogue description, but I aim to focus on the letterbooks, and I will explain why later in the presentation. The Letterbooks subseries contains 74 volumes from 1678 to 1818, and 55 of these between 1678, 6 years into the running of the Royal African Company, and 1750, when it was incorporated by Act of Parliament into the Company of Merchants Trading to Africa. These 55 volumes will be the initial focus of the project. As you can see, the current catalogue descriptions are very sparse, with a few numbered or alphabetised volumes, some letters in full and some in abstract, and many that simply say "from Africa," with no specificity on location, sender or subject. Although this project is in its early days, I hope that we can populate these entries with important historical information to aid researchers researching the history of the slave trade. So why the letterbooks? As you can see, this is a multifaceted series that contains lots of important records for studying the transatlantic slave trade in the late 17th and 18th centuries. The slave trade is a big subject in economic history, and we can learn from ledgers and account books about the wealth that was gained from slave labour and human trafficking, and its role in the making of European empires and the growth of domestic economies. However, what the letterbooks afford us is a glimpse beyond the numbers into the everyday activities of merchants on the west coast of Africa, including some rare insights into their engagement with native Africans and the treatment and experience of enslaved Africans. One of the volumes that I've been looking at closely is T7T55, which are letters sent from the Council of the Royal African Company in London to James Fort in Gambia. From this volume, I want to give you a few examples of some of the interesting details we can pull out of the letterbooks. The volume is largely full of instructions from the Council to the chief merchants in Gambia, who at that time were Henry Glynn and William Ramsay. In a letter dated May 16, 1721, the Council wrote to the merchants and the governor of the fort, Colonel Thomas Whitney, with a list of instructions that ranged from the encouragement of new trades, such as redwood and beeswax, to the instructions to trade slaves for gold and ivory. At this point in the company's history, the Royal African Company sought to diversify the commodities they traded in, but the trade of slaves was still an important part of this, often used to exchange with other European traders for what were perceived as the more valuable goods of gold and ivory. The Council wrote, quote, "You are to promote all you can the disposing of the slaves to the Portuguese for gold, teeth, or any other commodities proper to make a return at England at a reasonable rate." Teeth or elephant's teeth were the words used to refer to ivory. Within the letter, there were references to the bad treatment of the chaplain at Gambia by his ship captain, as well as directives to acquire knowledge from slaves about the interior of the country, with the aim of receiving knowledge on natural resources that could be commodified. Quote, "In regard to thorough knowledge of the inland parts of Africa may prove of very great advantage to the company, in order the better to come at it, you are to take care, as often as any parcels of negroes are brought down to be sold, to make quick inquiry as possible to find out what sort of country they came from. And if no linguista can be had, who know their language, you may choose to put 2 or 3 of the most likely ones to make house slaves, by which means either some of your own slaves will in all probability in a year's time learn enough of their language, or they will that of yours, as to be able to understand each other, and then by asking proper questions, useful discoveries may in time be made." I find this very interesting from the perspective of my own research, for it shows the value of indigenous and slave knowledge in colonial endeavours and how Europeans often relied on this. This is something I hope to pursue further in my research. From these letters, we also get a sense of different types of people working for the Royal African Company. An earlier letter from the Council to the chief merchants provided details of personnel on the ground in Gambia, inquiring after one James Smith Cook of the ship Royal Anne and requesting that he could be discharged to return home to his parents. Interestingly, we get a rare glimpse into European women's work in Empire in the same letter. Quote, "We find there are several women going over to Gambia, to each of whom the company make the allowance of £12 per annum for provisions. You are to give directions that the said women be employed as nurses to look after the sick, as occasion shall require." However, again, we get the grislier details of the operation of the slave trade in the same letter, here through reference to the ship Otter. Quote, "The Otter, Captain Forster, is under orders to sail to Ireland, and there take in provisions, artificers and soldiers, and from then to the Madeiras to lade wine, all which she is to deliver into your custody, and upon her arrival at Gambia, and after that you are to put a freight of negroes on board her, and consign the same to Francis Willis and Charles Chiswell, our agents at Virginia." Here we see the connections between named merchants in Gambia, Africa, and slave agents in Virginia, North America, connecting people across continents. In another letter of January 23, 1721, we see the decisions made to reroute slave vessels to optimise profit in American markets. Quote, We very much approve of your intentions of sending the Martha to Jamaica instead of Maryland, not only because we believe the season would have been far too advanced, but also because we are satisfied that they will come to a better market at Jamaica. The information in these records gives crucial context to a high number of slave voyages. Valuable information on slave voyages has been captured in the external Slave Voyages database, a collaborative database created by slave trade scholars across the world. One of my ideas related to this cataloguing project is linking up the voyages mentioned in the letterbooks to the Slave Voyage database, which collates statistical information on European slave voyages from the 16th to the 18th centuries. We can see here the entries of the Otter, mentioned earlier, beginning in London, stopping at Gambia to pick up slaves, and landing in York River in Virginia, likely to agents Willis and Chiswell, who were mentioned in the letter. From a variety of records, including shipbooks and invoice books in the T70 records, the database gives information on the number of slaves embarked, so 209 in this case, and those that disembarked, 193, meaning that 16 Africans died on this one journey. Other voyages in this period have much higher mortality rates. The T70 letters can help us flesh out the human decisions and activities behind the slave trade. The examples I've given are from just a handful of letters from one volume, and we can extract so many important details from cataloguing the letterbook series more effectively. I'm still in the scoping phase of the project, looking through the letterbooks and contemplating the best way to improve the catalogue descriptions. The letterbooks are not without their challenges. Many of the letterbooks reproduce letters in their entirety. However, many of the volumes are collections of abstracts or extracts. This creates problems when we think of the most effective way to produce item-level descriptions and whether this is the best way forward. Enhanced volume descriptions alone could vastly improve the representation of the collection on discovery, giving information on correspondence and subject matters. As you have seen, this project is very much in its infancy, but I have enjoyed introducing you to T70 and the important opportunities it presents.